Hello! Secret of Mana doesn't only have a great soundtrack with a special synergy between the composed music and the sample work, it also has a couple of examples of nice quartal harmony and whale song, but quartal harmony will be the subject of this video. While a traditional tertian chord is built by thirds, minor or major, a quartal chord is instead built by fourths. Perfect fourths, or sometimes augmented ones. Just as a tertian chord can contain from just 3 tones up to 7, a quartal chord can have its fourths stacked up to, well, 12 different notes if you would like to. Kostka has an easy way to describe these chords, where you write a digit for the number of tones, times a digit for the interval that is stacked, and the name of the root. So this would be a 5 times 4 on D. 5 tones stacked in fourths from the tone D, or in a more chordy layout. These quartal chords gives a rather different sound, at least in their basic form. Political Pressure from Trial of Mana is a good example of this. And yeah, I know the video title only says Secret of Mana, but you probably shouldn't believe everything on YouTube. If we look at the choir, the quartal stacks are rather obvious. They all have 3 tones, all are in root position, and therefore all the parts move in parallel motion. If we on the other hand include the bass, even though it is only 1 tone, things get more interesting. Now we start the phrase with a 3-tone chord, where the bass doubles the top tone, and ends with a 4-tone chord, with the root in the bass. The chords in the middle appear more as passing chords when the bass drone doesn't fit as a chord note. So, quartal chords doesn't have to be in root position. On the contrary, Precichetti describes them as rootless chords where any tone can function as a root. The same way as a tertian chord can be voiced in a number of ways, a quartal can too, but only almost. The stack of fourths is an important component in the sound of the quartal chord, so if you lose too much of it, it will sound less quarty. Compare these 3 voicings of the same chord. Although they have the same tones, the second one has lost that quartal feeling. There are 3 reasons for this. There are no intervals of fourths left. We no longer have the spaciness of a normal quartal chord, and this chord is all too similar to a traditional A minor 11th. This works in both directions, so we can make a tertian chord sound more like a quartal chord by voicing it with a lot of fourths, and preferably no thirds. Compare these two different voicings of a C major 7th chord. So let's get back to Hiroki Kikuta and have a look at the piece with different voicings, Mystic Invasion. And now we're back in The Secret of Mana again. Mr. Kikuta defines this as the mystery theme, a theme that comes back in Whisper and Mantra. So according to the title, we can assume a certain ambiguity. For the record, there are only 5 parts, while the quartal chords range from 3 tones up to tone stacks of 6 with 1 tone omitted. We also have a few chords with augmented fourths instead of perfect ones. Now, first of all, quartal harmony isn't anything that demands commitment. Some composers change harmonic language more often than they change their socks. Which isn't meant to be a comment about hygiene. Here, Kikutachi starts in a clear quartal territory, but by the second system there are obviously a lot of tertian chords. Some of them may be up for discussion. This E minor 7th may be 5/4 stacked from a B with a 3rd tone missing, or you may think that would be overanalyzing. The chord before has a nice stacking of fourths with only 1 note missing, but it is also possible to define as a G minor 9th with a 7th in the bass. The bass even resolves correctly down to the E. But there are definitely a mix between quartal and tertian harmony. So, how does this work? Well, first of all, the fact that some chords can be both tertian and quartal depending on voicing is important. Those chords are the glue between the two harmonic styles. Second, there are very few strict stackings of fourths. Only 2 actually. All other chords have some different kind of voicing. Sometimes tones are doubled, as when 5 parts should fit into a 3-tone chord. At other times, tones are omitted. In this case, maybe because the B would create a tritone against the bass, and in that case, Kikutachi may have preferred to double the A. Much of the voicings also follows the register. When the melody is high, we have open voicings. When it's low, we get close voicings. All for the sake of good part writing. This too blurs the line between obvious quartal and tertian chords. At last, the least common denominator seems to be that all chords have a perfect fourth as their top interval, no matter if they are quartal or tertian, and this seems to be enough to bridge the gap between the 2 chord types. So, now that we can make the quartal harmonies sound tertian and the tertian sound quartal, we can start cheating. A Wish has almost none quartal harmony, and still hasn't lost that quartal feeling. Even though the chords are as traditional as they can be, they are still voiced with a lot of space, just as quartal chords, and with a lot of fifths and fourths. Each bar on the first line contains only one interval of a third, always in the middle, and it's surrounded by 2/5 and 1/4. As well are the thirds of the triad avoided on the first beat of most of the measures, and instead has a focus of fifths and sevenths. On the last line of the piece, only the left hand keeps implying traditional chords, while the upper line draws more and more to quartal and quintal intervals. The result is a wonderful mix where we get the best of two musical worlds, and that fragile serenity that can only be found when killing monsters in the snow. Let's end on a thick lick in Into the Thick of It, where the idea that the voicings and the part writing is more important than the type of chords come to full splendor. The accompaniment consists of a 1-bar riff with a few variations over a 4-bar period, and every now and then it is transposed up from D Dorian to E flat Dorian, and then back. The harmony of the riff then has some options. We could consider it a 7-tone stacking of fourths from D. This would have some merit. The most used tones are the ones in the bottom of the stack, and you could argue that they are voiced in a way that outlines a quartal chord. Another option is to simply say, this is a texture with all the tones from the D Dorian scale. After all, most tones appear in any register. The third option is to notice that the tones B and E only appears on the last beat, which may give a feel of a turnaround that may be interpreted like this. We will ignore this option, Not because it's bad, but because Mr. Kikuta did. If it was to be considered a turnaround, the tones E and B would be non-chord tones in the beginning of each measure, and not used a lot in the melodies, and so are not the case. Both the first two options means every tone in the scale will sound okay in any part, which also means that any diatonic interval can be used between two parts. Thirds or sixths will sound traditional. Fourths and fifths will have their own unique sonority. Unison and octaves only enforces a part. And Kikutashi, of course, uses all. The flutes starts off with the parallel sixths. While the choir's parallel fifths stay in the background but gets to shine between the phrases. The middle section gives more space to the choir's fifths. While the flute and strings plays in unison. This new melody has a focus on the lower part of the stack of fourths, if we consider the harmony that way. In the last section, the choir shifts from parallel fifths to parallel fourths for a mild variation. The flute is still in unison, but now with a guitar. I hope you enjoyed this video and have a nice day.